Hello, beautiful ones. Um, Two things before we begin. One, like full disclosure, this is the third time I have tried to record this video because we've had knocks at the door, we've had Luna needing to go out, we've had all sorts going on. So third time lucky, fingers crossed. The other thing is elephant in the room, my hair is now blonde. So I remembered just how much hard work having red hair is. So we've gone back to the blonde. I can't be doing with stained towels and doing my hair every 2 weeks. So I'm sure you'll have questions about that because people often message me about my hair. So that's that out the way. Today, day 2. But firstly, actually, I hope you had a beautiful ritual. I hope you managed to find a gorgeous way to mark day 1. I have just done a self-attunement using Reiki and a self-healing with Reiki before I sat down. I lit a candle, still got my candle lit as I'm talking to you, and wrote down my intentions for these 28 days. And my intention for these 28 days is a deepening. I want a deepening of my practice. I want to, that's often the goal with spiritual practices, right? Is to deepen that connection with self, deepen that connection with spirit, universe, God, whatever you want to call that. But that's really my intention, is to show up fully for that and to be really present for that and to not let excuses get in the way, because it's so easy, so easy. I've been in my spiritual on my spiritual journey. And that's really hard to put a marker on it, actually, as I say that, because it depends. It depends. There's been many different routes, but a long time. And I know through that time, there's been periods of like complacency where I've shown up, I've done the thing, I've meditated, I've done my Reiki practice, I've, done my chanting perhaps, or I've done mantras, and, I've done the things. But actually, if I'm really honest with myself, there's been times when it's just another thing to do. And have I been fully present? Actually, if I'm really honest, there probably hasn't been as much intention. It's impossible to hold intention consistently in a really deep way. But I'm hoping, for me personally, these 28 days is going to be an opportunity for me to really hold that intention of being present, getting deep with my practice, and for myself, reconnecting with these things. And this week, we're going to be looking at some of the real foundations before we dive into perhaps some of the more complex things, or depending on your viewpoint, maybe more interesting things. Because I know at the beginning of my journey, I wanted the interesting. I wanted the complex. I was like seeking what I thought the masters were doing, what was the real depth in their practice. And I had this image in my head that would be some real kind of complex ritual. But actually, what I've found to be true is often it's more depth in the foundations. So if you're quite experienced in terms of like spiritual practices, I don't want to say experienced in spirituality, that sounds a bit odd, but if you've already got quite a stable spiritual practice, You might be tempted to breeze over this week. I would invite you not to, because actually, this is often where the real medicine comes, where the real shifts come, where the real kind of leaps in our awareness and our self-awareness and our awakening and self-actualization. And depending on what path you're following, you know, that raise or rising in consciousness, from my point of view, it's often comes about through the real basics. So bear with me if this seems a bit boring this week, or if you are completely new to these things, bear with me, bear with the practices. If they seem a little bit intangible, if they seem a little bit esoteric, because sometimes they take a moment to click, or they take a moment to cement within you. So today I wanted to talk to you about centering. And this idea is kind of present in many lineages. Many of you know I have been interested in many lineages. I continue to be. But one of the things that I keep finding over and over and over again is most of them tend to have similar elements. And this element of centering tends to be present in many of them. It's certainly present in Eastern traditions, so things like yoga, Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, Reiki. You know, much of my journey has been focused on the East. But also in the West, when we look at things like esoteric Christianity, when we look at things like shamanic practices, like Celtic practices, so some of those kind of real kind of tribal spiritual practices, this is really present. I would say most forms of spirituality where you are in control and there isn't a third party in between, i.e. there's no gatekeeper. This idea of centering is quite present. Even things like paganism, Wicca. So what is it? What does that mean? And how can we do it? And the truth is, we've all experienced that feeling of being centered. And it's always spoken about actually as well in like martial arts. For those of you that have done my Reiki course, we've talked about that kind of idea of centering. But basically, it's this idea that we come back to our true self. We come back to not our crazy monkey mind, not our turbulent emotions. You know, these things aren't us. These things are just like the weather that passes through the sky, and we're the sky. So when we feel centered, you know it, there's like this feeling of, it's a feeling of like self-assuredness, a feeling of, I'm just feeling into this now to help describe it. It's a feeling of like settledness within. So there's no turbulence. You're back to you. You're not disturbed, undisturbed, I think is a really good way of putting it. So we all would have experienced this at certain times in our life, whether we've been trying to do it or not. And many of us, especially if you've been on a spiritual path for a while, can just snap yourself back into it. If you haven't, or even if you've been on a spiritual path for a long time, like this is a practice that's lovely to come back to, right? I do this often if I'm having a turbulent time in my external world, or even my internal world is feeling a little bit turbulent because so I know, like, from a physical point of view, over the past few months, I've had to take things like steroids, which actually affect your nervous system on like a physical level. They affect your mind on a physical level. And I felt that, I felt things like physical anxiety feelings. So things like palpitations, things like that kind of shakiness. That's the word I want to use. Like there's a shakiness that comes with anxiety, right? And so it's something that I come back to time and time again is just center yourself, Holly. Center yourself. And it really makes a difference. So these centering practices can be, like all things, as elaborate as we want them to be, as complicated as we want them to be, or as simple as we want them to be. And today, I invite you to just do a really simple centering practice, because the simpler it is, the easier it is to draw on when you need it in the moment. Those times like, say you've got a job interview, or you're in an important meeting, or you're having a Barney with the other half. You want to be able to go, center quickly, right? You don't want to be thinking, well, I need to go away and I need to light a candle, then I need to burn some sage, and we ain't got time for that. It's a busy world. So I wanted to just kind of show you how quick you can center yourself, but also give you a bit of a longer practice to work with today for those of you that want to really play with this and go, yeah, actually, I do want to feel more centered and I do need to strengthen this within me. So I'm going to use a model which is based on a kind of Japanese model. So from a Japanese point of view, like many of us have heard of the chakra system. From a Japanese point of view, we have 3 energy centers. So we have one which is our lower abdomen, we have one which is in our heart space, and we have one which is like in our third eye. And this is kind of like mind-body energy. So this is the equivalent to the chakra system in India, but it's far less complex. We also see a similar system in Celtic shamanism, this kind of 3 energy points, 3 main energy points that we can work with. And I find that quite useful. Don't get me wrong, I love the chakra system to work with. And I think there's real benefit with working with the full chakra system. However, like I say, often our lives are complex. Often our lives are busy. And sometimes we need a really quick thing that's going to pull us back into us. So we want that kind of connection to mind, body, spirit. And this lower chakra or lower energy point is about 2 centimeters below the navel. And you'll often notice that when I'm leading a meditation, I will invite people to pay attention to this area of the body because it naturally centers us. They use this in martial arts because when we're centered, we're kind of unable to be knocked over because we're grounded in ourselves. We're grounded in who we are. We are stable. We're not shaky. This is what I mean. It's like that opposite to the shakiness. We are solid. We become solid in who we are. And you would have experienced that, right? Whether you've done these practices or not, you would have experienced those times where you just felt very solid in your body, very solid in who you are, very solid in yourself, very solid in your opinions. And so, operating from that place, not just in our spiritual practice, but in our day-to-day life, is life-changing. We don't overthink. We don't sweat the small stuff. We don't, we can be self-aware, but not from a place of just being overly self-critical. We can look at things like, oh yeah, I may have done that wrong. I just won't do it again. We look at it through the lens of constantly learning rather than self-judgment. So from a mental point of view, that's really helpful. From an emotional point of view, that is extremely helpful. From a just operating in your life, in your relationships. Because half the time, if you look at relationship problems, it's because everyone's taking everything personally, right? You feel like someone's making a judgment about you, or you feel like someone's disrespecting you, or you feel like that there's something in the way that you're being treated that you're taking as a criticism of self. When we're centered, it's kind of like that just goes over us. Like, yeah, whatever. Like, there's no, I don't want to say there's no self, because that's probably more of a complex teaching than we've got to, but we're more able to allow those things to come, like just breeze over us without us taking them to heart, without getting offended. There's a lot of people getting offended these days, right? I sound very anti-woke as I say that, but I do think there's a lot of people being offended and not enough listening going on. Controversial, I know. So let's get centered. So let's just initially pay attention to this point in the body, which is about 2 centimeters from below your belly button. So you can put your hands there if that helps you. And what I invite you to do is just breathe into this area of the body. And you're not forcing it or trying to do anything. But just paying attention to that breath being in that lower part of the abdomen. And you can open your eyes again if you close them. And just notice how you feel. Do you feel a bit more stable? A bit more in touch with now? Less in your head? Less in your emotional body? And that was literally what, 3-4 breaths? So you can imagine if you did a meditation practice that went on for 20-25 minutes, the effect that could possibly have. Or even 5-10 minutes, right? That it doesn't take long to become centered, to feel more strong. And when I say strong, I don't mean like in a fight way. Strong as in a, I'm not going to get pushed over way. Strong in a way of, I'm not vulnerable. I don't feel as vulnerable. I don't feel as scared. So that's just a really simple thing you can do wherever you are, right? Supermarket, in a meeting, job interview. You don't even have to close your eyes. Just, the amount of times that just in a meeting I've thought, pay attention to this part. You may hear it being referred to as your hara space. You may hear it being referred to as a tanden, which is the Japanese word for like the chakra. But yeah, just connecting into this space can center you quite quickly into you. We can take this practice a little bit further, or I won't say further. We can, if you want a longer practice today, and you find it difficult to just keep your attention in that part of the body, what you can do is imagine yourself breathing light into this space and then exhaling it. So not exhaling the light, exhaling anything that you don't want in that space. So for example, breathing in like a healing light, a strengthening light, a grounding light. And then you breathe out anything that doesn't need to be there. Breathe out anything that's making you wobbly. Breathe out anything that's causing shakiness. Breathe out any worries you've got. Breathe out any insecurities. Breathe out any doubts. And so I invite you to play with this today. It can be 5, it can be 10, it can be 30 minutes, it could be an hour, it could be 2. It doesn't matter. But it's about really connecting into that space of being centered. And we need to feel centered before we do spiritual connection. Because otherwise what you will find is your ego will be running the show. Your ego's not bad, it's not wrong. We won't go into that too much today. But when we're doing our spiritual work, we don't want our ego running the show because it will get in the way of what needs to come through. It will get in the way of what you need to receive. So today is really about getting in touch with being centered inside of yourself, being centered in who you are, being centered outside of the mental and emotional body. This sounds like one of those practices that is too simple to be effective. I genuinely believe this centering has probably made the most difference in my life outside of like my spiritual practice. Because it is something I come back to effortlessly now. It's something that I do without even realizing. You know, if I'm scared, if I'm nervous, if something rocks me, if something angers me, something frustrates me, I can quite easily come back to this space and feel like me again. Not feel like I'm being taken over by emotion. Not feel like I'm being taken over by thought. So I hope that has been useful for you today. I look forward to hearing your experience. I will be doing this with you. So yeah, feel free to share in the Facebook group how you found it. What came through for you? Did you find it easy? Was it difficult? Because our mind and emotions can be quite loud, right? So don't be surprised if sometimes this is really easy and other times it's really not. That's life. But the more we practice it, often the easier it is to connect into that true self, that centered self, that part of us that isn't disturbed. All right, lovelies. I'm wishing you a gorgeous day. I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.